Welcome, traveler, to a journey not through grand palaces or sun-drenched battlefields, but into the quiet, often unyielding nights of history. Tonight, we invite you to imagine a world far from your comfortable bed, a world shaped by ambition, gunpowder, and the relentless chill of a campaigning winter. We seek not the roar of cannon, but the whisper of frost, the subtle creak of leather in the dark, and the almost imperceptible shiver of a man who once commanded an empire, yet craved a moment's true peace. If you wish, dim the lights and let the gentle hum of your surroundings melt away. For tonight you stand on the cusp of an encampment, a vast canvas of canvas and cold, where the very air breathes vigilance. And there, amidst the muffled sounds of a sleeping army, a figure emerges from the shadows of his own legend, ready to guide you. The scent arrives first, damp earth, old metal, and the faintest whisper of cold iron. You open your eyes, and you are no longer in your room. Instead, you are inside a small military tent, the dim light from a half-burnt candle casting flickering shadows, creating a fragile breathing room of light in the vast, quiet winter night. You feel the hard, cold ground beneath your bare feet. Across from you sits a man. He is a formidable figure even in this subdued light. His uniform, though travel-worn, speaks of authority, and his gaze, though weary, holds a sharp, unyielding intelligence. Before him rests a low campaign table holding a spread map, scattered bronze chess pieces of an unfinished game. He looks at the empty space on the map and lets out a sigh, not of weariness, but of fond acceptance. His voice is low and soft, like wool brushing against old canvas. "Ah, you're awake, mon ami," he murmurs, his gaze still on the map, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Perfect timing. The night often holds more clarity than the brightest day, wouldn't you agree? You manage a soft, disoriented whisper. Where am I, and who are you?" He chuckles, a dry, almost rusty sound. A fair question given the circumstances. You are, shall we say, a guest of the Grand Army. And I am a humble servant of France, currently contemplating the next move on a rather expansive chessboard. He picks up a chess piece, a small bronze knight, and studies it. This piece, this knight, represents ambition. It leaps over obstacles, disregards tradition, and can wreak havoc when placed just so. Still trying to process, you quietly ask, "You're a general?" He turns to you fully now, his eyes, though shadowed, glinting with a familiar intensity that sends a shiver down your spine, not from cold, but from recognition. More than that, perhaps. A force of nature, some might say. A man whose name echoes with power and strategic brilliance if the gossips in Paris are to be believed. For tonight you see before you Napoleon Bonaparte. A quiet gasp escapes you, a whispered realization. Napoleon? He nods, setting the chess piece down. Indeed. And you, my unexpected companion, have found yourself on the cusp of an encampment, a vast canvas of canvas and cold where the very air breathes vigilance. Forget the grand palaces and the roar of cannon for a moment. Tonight we seek the whisper of frost, the subtle creak of leather in the dark, and the almost imperceptible shiver of a man who commanded an empire, yet craved a moment's true peace. He gestures with a hand, inviting you to observe the dim contours of the tent around you. You might wonder why you are here in this less than luxurious setting. It is because I wish to tell you directly of the intricate dance between ambition and exhaustion, between the clamor of war and the desperate need for a few moments of actual rest. He leans forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The history books they speak of, my victories, my campaigns, my grand strategies. They rarely speak of the cold ground, the endless nights, or the dreams that never quite arrived. But you will hear it. So, he says, a finality in his tone, yet still inviting, draw your blankets closer. Feel the warmth you possess, a warmth I so rarely knew, and prepare to step into the emperor's cold bed. And so you drift through the misty heart of a sleeping army, guided by the Emperor Napoleon, who listens to forgotten things on a quiet search for a story that has yet to be written. This is Sleep Among Titans. If your eyes remain open, you have arrived at the perfect hour. If they drift closed, wonderful, the cold will carry you gently while you dream. Should this journey bring you peace, leave a whispered thought below, or light a lantern of subscription, so the next story may find its way to you. The page will wait patient as ink on paper until you return. In the flickering light of a dying fire, you find yourself at the entrance of a simple military tent. A figure sits on a rickety stool, his greatcoat draped over his shoulders, creating a silhouette that is at once familiar and surprisingly intimate. He looks up, and his eyes in the shadows seem to recognize your presence without surprise. A smile tinged with weariness and dry humor touches his lips as he speaks. "Welcome," Napoleon says, his voice low and intimate. "To, well, my office, my bedchamber, and on occasion my courtroom, all wrapped within these few square meters of canvas. Do not mind the lack of amenities. Luxury, I have found, is often the enemy of efficiency." You instinctively shrink your shoulders as a cold draft slips through the tent's flap. His words about the lack of comfort are not just an observation. You can feel them. He seems to read your thoughts. "Do you feel the cold?" he asks, and it isn't truly a question. It is not like the cold of Paris, which merely taps at your window pane. The cold here on an open field in Italy is a living entity. It seeps through the seams of this tent, it finds the gaps in your cloak, and it settles deep in your bones, a constant reminder that comfort belongs to another world, a world you left behind many months ago. You take a deep breath, and the air carries the complex scent he describes. In the cities, the air smells of fresh bread, of perfumes, of rain on stone. Here, the bouquet is more robust, he says, a glint in his eye. It is the scent of damp earth, of anxious horses, of wet wool from 1,000 uniforms that will never fully dry. And beneath it all, the smoke from 100 dying fires, a scent of grim purpose that clings to your hair, your skin, your very thoughts. He pauses, looking at you intently. "I imagine that if I could bottle this scent, I could end a war simply by sending a cask of it to the enemy. No one, I assure you, wants to fight an army that smells like this." A sudden smile forms on your lips at the unexpected mundanity of the complaint. You listen as he directs, and indeed you can hear them, the small sounds almost buried under the wind, but now strangely clear. "That is not silence, it is never true silence," Napoleon whispers. "This is the sound of an army trying to rest. That faint rhythmic creaking is the sound of leather, and that low murmur over there is the sound of soldiers reminding themselves they are still alive, that tomorrow they will fight again." He tilts his head toward a nearby tent. "And that sound, that remarkably steady, percussive sound, that is my young lieutenant from Gascony. He is snoring. He snores, I believe, to the precise rhythm of a military marching drum. A true patriot, even in his sleep." Your eyes are drawn to the rolled-up saddle he had indicated, trying to imagine the most powerful man in Europe seeking rest on such a crude object. "My bed, you ask?" He guesses your gaze. "Ah, it is a throne of practicality. That roll of leather, my saddle, serves as my pillow. This greatcoat, my mattress and my blanket. It is not comfortable, but it possesses a singular virtue. It does not allow you to sleep too deeply. A short, fitful, vigilant sleep that is the most a commander can hope for." He straightens his back, a gesture that reveals a fatigue he cannot entirely hide. "I often think of the farmers whose fields we march across. I imagine a farmer in Normandy sleeping now on a bed of straw. I sleep on a bed of leather. His back in the morning probably aches just as much as mine. We are brothers in our physical discomfort. But he wakes to worry about the rain in his crops. I wake to worry about the fate of Italy. I am still undecided as to which of us has the more burdensome task." His words hang in the cold air. You recognize the profound contrast. This man who can move mountains with a single order shares a common physical pain with the most ordinary of peasants. "And there is no privacy here," he says, his voice lowering. "That is the first casualty of any campaign. These canvas walls, they do not keep out the cold, and they most certainly do not keep out sounds or secrets. They merely suggest the idea of a room. You can hear the faint sound of footsteps outside, a reminder of the guards and officers who are always near. To be a general is to be public property. To be an emperor on campaign is to be a public monument that happens to breathe." You sit there in the shared silence, feeling the cold, listening to the sounds of the encampment, and understanding a small fraction of the stark reality behind the glorious portraits and the grand pages of history. This is his kingdom, a kingdom of canvas and cold, where sleep is a battle, and silence is the most precious victory. He rises from the stool, his movement possessing a sudden purpose that chases away the visible fatigue. He gestures for you to follow him deeper into the tent where a makeshift wooden table stands. Upon it, under the weak, buttery light of a single lantern, a vast map is spread out, its lines and symbols resembling an intricate web. Though he is surrounded by a sleeping army of thousands, he seems to enter a world of his own here, a world of strategy and internal silence. You feel the air in the tent shift. The physical cold from outside seems less important now than the intellectual tension radiating from the paper. You see, he says, his voice has lost its earlier humor, now low and resonant with a different kind of energy. My true encampment is not this tent. It is here. His finger hovers over the paper, tracing a river without touching it, as if afraid to disturb the fates already drawn there. This is where the real battles are fought. Not on the field, but in the silence of these hours. Every one of these lines, every one of these arrows is a possibility, a gamble. You step closer, your eyes following his hand. The names written in black ink, Lodi Arcole Rivoli, cease to be places. They are forks in the road of history, hinges upon which the future of Europe will turn. The map is not paper, it is a pale continent of both promise and doom, the faint candlelight making the rivers look like veins and the mountains like sleeping bones. They say I see soldiers as numbers. He continues, his gaze still fixed on the map, a universe of his own making. And perhaps in a way they are right. You cannot afford to mourn every man, or you would drown in your own tears before the first cannon is fired. You learn to see death as a variable, a cost, a necessary expenditure for the acquisition of victory. That is the cruel mathematics of command. You feel a chill trace its way down your spine, a cold that has nothing to do with the wind outside. It is the chill of absolute, unsentimental calculation. He looks up from the map, his eyes meeting yours in the dim light. You learn to separate the heart from the mind. You must. The heart is a poor general. He picks up a quill from a small portable inkwell, balancing it between his fingers. The tip is dark with dried ink, and you notice faint similar stains on his fingertips, the marks of a man who writes more than he sleeps. The mind, he says softly, almost to himself, it never rests. Even when my body is exhausted, pleading for the oblivion of sleep, this machine, he taps his temple with a fingertip, it continues to turn. It rearranges regiments in my dreams. It plots supply lines while I am trying to digest my meager dinner. It wages entire campaigns in the space between one breath and the next. He looks at you, and for a fleeting moment you see a flicker of profound vulnerability in his eyes, the look of a man trapped within his own relentless intellect. They call it genius. But genius is merely a prettier word for relentless exhaustion. It is a candle lit at both ends. It provides a brilliant light, yes, but it consumes itself twice as fast. And sometimes in the most solitary hours of the night, when the only sound is the scratching of this quill, I wonder if the light is worth the wax. You stand there in silence, a witness to this quiet confession, realizing that the burden he carries is not just that of an empire, but of a mind that can never find its own armistice. His sleeplessness is not a sacrifice. It is a permanent state of being, the price he pays for the clarity he seeks. His victories are born from this private, unending war. And so he concludes, his voice regaining its certainty, the moment of reflection replaced by a familiar sense of purpose. It is in this silence, when the rest of a continent is sleeping, that I am at my most effective. The discomfort keeps me awake. The cold keeps my senses sharp. The distractions of the court are 100 leagues away. He sets the tip of the quill down on a single point on the map, a small town beside a river. Perhaps then, this is the true throne room. This small circle of lantern light, this rickety table, this silence. This is the place where empires are forged and broken, not by the clash of swords, but by the whisper of a quill on paper. He leaves you with that thought, turning his full attention back to his work. The scratching of his quill begins again, a sound so small, so utterly insignificant, yet it is shaping the destiny of millions. It is a steady, rhythmic, almost soothing sound in the quiet of the tent. You watch as he makes a note in the margin, his brow furrowed in concentration. The emperor is gone, and in his place is the strategist, the architect of tomorrow. You understand then that for this man, rest is not the absence of activity, but the absolute undiluted focus upon it. This is his internal encampment, his fortress of solitude built not of stone, but of unrelenting will and bone-deep weariness. And in this strange, cold, and silent place, you are for a moment its only other inhabitant. The soundscape shifts. The wind outside is still present but feels more distant. The primary sounds are now inside the tent. The slow, deliberate scratching of a quill on thick paper. The occasional soft rustle of a large map. He stands from the crude table, his previous weariness seemingly burned away by a new, more focused intensity. The air in the tent, already taut with the chill of the Italian night, now hums with a different kind of energy. It is the energy of a mind at work, a force more formidable than any army. He gestures for you to remain seated as he begins to pace his heavy campaign boots, creating a soft, rhythmic thud on the packed earth of the tent floor. It is a path already worn smooth. You realize a small circular track forged by countless hours of restless thought. He does not speak for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance, his world contained entirely within the canvas walls. You watch him, this man who commands legions, now a caged lion in a space no larger than a commoner's pantry. The lantern light catches the sharp angles of his face, throwing his brow into deep shadow, making his eyes seem like dark, bottomless pools of concentration. Finally, he stops pacing and turns to you, a strange, almost haunted look in his eyes. They think the battles are fought out there, he says, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbs the silence. He gestures vaguely towards the sleeping camp beyond the tent flap, with cannons and cavalry and the screams of men. They are wrong. That is merely the final performance of a play that has already been written, rehearsed, and perfected in here. He taps his temple again, a gesture you are coming to recognize. The true battlefield is the mind, and it is a field where there is no night, no truce, no moment of peace. You follow his gaze as it drifts back to the map spread across the table. It is covered in his spidery, forceful handwriting, with lines, arrows, and calculations crowding the margins. He leans over it, his whole body coiled with a tense energy like a predator studying its prey. An idea, he whispers, and the word itself seems to hang in the cold air. That is where it begins. Not a grand strategy, not a sweeping vision, just a single small idea. Perhaps it is a weakness I perceive in the enemy's line, a rumor about a supply train that is poorly guarded, or a new way to move artillery across a river they believe is impassable. It arrives unbidden, a ghost in the quiet of the night. He straightens up and looks at you, his eyes burning with a feverish light. And once it arrives, it is a tyrant. It will not let me rest. It will not allow me the mercy of sleep. It whispers to me, demanding attention. It shows me possibilities, variations. What if the enemy anticipates this move? What if the weather turns? What if my own generals hesitate? The ghost of the idea presents me with 1,000 failures before I have even had a chance to attempt a single success. It must be wrestled with, pinned down, examined from every angle until all of its secrets are laid bare. He begins to pace again, his footsteps a steady counterpoint to the restless wind outside. It is an exhausting, maddening process. There is no glory in it. There is only the cold, hard work of turning a fleeting possibility into a concrete certainty. My body can be screaming for rest, my eyes burning from staring at this map for hours, but the mind will not yield. It has caught the scent of a new path, and it will not stop until it has explored it to its very end. He gestures to a small metal cup on the corner of the table. He picks it up, swirls the dark liquid inside, and takes a sip, his face twisting into a slight grimace. Cold, he mutters, setting it down with a soft click. As it always is. This is not for pleasure. It is fuel, like coal for a furnace. It keeps the machine turning even when the parts are worn and groaning. You watch this simple human act, the drinking of cold, bitter coffee in the dead of night, and it somehow makes the scale of his intellectual labor feel even more immense. This is the unglamorous reality of genius. He stops his pacing and looks at you with a wry, almost challenging smile. My aides, my generals, even my family. They worry for my health. They implore me to rest. Sire, you must sleep. They say, their faces etched with concern. They are good men. loyal, but they do not understand. He leans forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a shared secret between you and him. My sleeplessness is not a weakness. It is a weapon. It is perhaps the greatest weapon I possess. While my counterpart, the Austrian general, what is his name? Wurmser Alvinci. They change so often while he sleeps soundly in a warm bed, tucked away in some commandeered villa, confident in his superior numbers and his well-rested mind. I am here. I am awake. The intensity of his gaze holds you captive. I have already fought this battle 12 times, 100 times here in this tent. I have moved these pins. He gestures to the small colored markers on the map across every hill and valley. I have anticipated his movements. I have seen the flaws in his logic, the hesitations in his character. I have discovered the mistakes he is going to make tomorrow, and he has not even conceived of them yet. He will wake in the morning to face a battle. I will wake simply to confirm a conclusion. He gives a small, sharp nod, satisfied with his own chilling logic. So you tell me, my friend, which of us is truly the better rested, the man who has slept, or the man who has already won? You have no answer. You are simply struck by the terrifying brilliance of his perspective, the way he has transformed a human frailty into a cornerstone of his tactical dominance. His enemies sleep, and that to him is their fatal error. He seems to sense your silent awe, and his expression softens slightly. But do not mistake this for a gift. He says, his voice losing its edge of triumph and taking on a note of deep, resonant weariness. It is a burden. To live always one step ahead of the present means you are never truly in the present. You are forever a ghost in your own life, your mind perpetually occupying a future that has not yet come to pass. You taste the victory, yes, but you also taste the ash long before the fires have been lit. He runs a hand over his face, a gesture of profound exhaustion that seems to pull at every muscle. There are nights when the tyranny of thought is so absolute that I would trade a victory for an hour of true silence. Just 1 hour of a quiet mind, 1 hour of not being me. The confession hangs in the air, raw and unexpected. For a moment, the emperor, the general, the strategist vanishes, and all that is left is a man profoundly tired, trapped in the prison of his own mind. He turns back to the table, the moment of vulnerability passing as quickly as it came. He picks up the quill again, its sharp tip poised over the map like a scalpel. The scratching sound resumes, steady and deliberate. The ghost has returned, and it demands his attention once more. And you are left to sit in the cold, a silent witness to the unsleeping general and the restless, relentless forging of history. Of course. Here is the translated and greatly expanded section 2.2, written in the requested narrative style in English at approximately 2,000 words. The rhythmic scratching of the quill continues for a moment, a dry, lonely sound in the night. Then it stops. The silence that follows is heavier, more profound than the sound itself. You watch him as he works, and you notice a subtle shift in his posture. The fierce energy of the strategist, the hunter of possibilities, seems to recede, replaced by something more somber, more deliberate. The sound of his quill is no longer the quick, decisive stroke of an artist creating his masterpiece. It now sounds like an accountant carefully, painstakingly recording debts that can never be repaid. This is not just strategy. This is a ledger, a cold and meticulous calculation of the human cost. He suddenly stops, placing the quill down beside the inkwell with a quiet finality. He does not look at you, but at a blank space on the map, as if seeing something there that you cannot. A ghost battalion on an empty field. Every victory has its price. He says, his voice a low, meditative hum. A price paid in the currency of men's lives. My work in these hours is to ensure that the cost never outweighs the value of the prize. It is a terrible arithmetic, is it not? To weigh 1,000 lives against a strategic hill, a single bridge, and advantage of position. He finally turns to look at you, and in his eyes you see the immense, crushing weight of 1,000 such calculations. But a commander must make that calculation. He must be the one to look at the equation and solve it without flinching. If he cannot, he is not a leader. He is merely a butcher swinging his blade blindly in the chaos. A true general must be cold. He must be willing to sacrifice a limb to save the body. The difficulty, he pauses, his voice catching almost imperceptibly, is that you never forget the feeling of the limb you chose to sever. His finger, stained with a faint trace of ink, drifts over the map to a small village whose name you do not recognize. Last year, he says, his voice distant, we lost nearly 600 men taking a single ridge near this town. 600. To history, that will be a footnote in a successful campaign. A statistic. But to me, it is 600 faces I can conjure in the dark. 600 letters that would never be sent home. 600 futures extinguished to secure one of mine. They say I have an extraordinary memory for military details, for the number of cannons in a battery or the depth of a river. It is true. But I am cursed with an equally extraordinary memory for names. L'an des Bessières. He speaks the names as if they are a litany, a private prayer. They are not numbers in my ledger. They are the ghosts who keep me company in this tent. You look around the dim Spartan space, and for a moment you can almost feel the presence of others, silent figures woven from memory, and regret, their unseen eyes watching the man who sent them to their deaths. Sometimes, he continues, his voice barely a whisper, I think I can hear their voices in the sound of the wind as it rattles the canvas. A question forms in your mind, silent but insistent. Does a man who carries such a host of ghosts ever find refuge in sleep? Does he dream? As if sensing your thought, a sad, humorless smile touches his lips. Dreams. He lets out a short, breathy laugh that holds no joy. Ah, dreams are a luxury. They are for men who can afford to let their minds run free. My mind is never free. It is always on the battlefield, always calculating, always at war, even when I close my eyes. If I dream of maps coming to life, of armies moving like chess pieces across a board that stretches to infinity. There is no peace, no green fields, no familiar faces from my youth. There is only the geometry of conflict. He rises from the stool and begins to pace once more, his boots tracing the worn path on the dirt floor. His steps are heavier now, each one seeming to press the weight of his thoughts deeper into the earth. There is no escape. You see, even sleep is another theater of operations, another campaign to be waged. Perhaps that is why I avoid it. Here at this table awake, I am in command. I can write, I can plan. I can impose my will upon the chaos. But in sleep, the chaos threatens to win. The ghosts speak more clearly then. He stops before the tent's flap, pulling it aside to look out at the deep, starless dark where his army sleeps. And so this is my fortress, he says, his tone shifting to one of quiet, philosophical acceptance. It is not built of stone, but of sleeplessness. It is not guarded by sentries, but by exhaustion. Within these invisible walls, I am safe from the dangers of complacency, from the weakness of a sentimental heart. But I am also alone. Utterly alone with these decisions, with these ghosts, with this terrible, necessary ledger. He turns from the darkness outside and looks directly at you, and in that moment, the connection between you is absolute and profound. You are not just a listener. You are a confessor, the sole witness to this private Gethsemane. That is the price of power, my friend. Not the crown, not the throne, not the cheering crowds. It is this silence. The silence of being the only man in the world who is still awake with the weight of tomorrow on his shoulders. He returns to the table, the moment of confession over. He sits, and with a final weary sigh, he picks up the quill. The scratching sound begins again, steady, rhythmic, lonely, in the vast quiet of the night. The fortress walls have closed once more. The emperor has returned to his internal encampment, to the work of calculating the human cost of glory. And you are left with the profound understanding that for this man, each sleepless night is not a sacrifice. It is a penance. It is a ritual. And it is the only way he knows how to carry the world forward into the dawn. You remain in the quiet of the tent, a silent observer in this small, flickering world of command. The moment of profound, soul-bearing reflection seems to have passed, and the man before you has once again become the general. The fortress of his mind, whose gates had briefly opened for you, is now sealed. The work of the empire does not permit long voyages into philosophy. It demands action. It demands ink. As if summoned by this silent shift in purpose, the tent flap rustles open. A young aide steps inside his shoulders, slumped with a weariness that speaks of many such nights. He moves with a practiced quietness, a deference born of both respect and a healthy fear of waking the lion. In his hands he carries a leather portfolio bulging with a fresh mountain of paper, a new wave of reports and requests from across the continent. He places it on the table with a soft thud that seems to echo in the stillness. Napoleon does not look up immediately. He finishes the line he is writing carefully, forming each letter with a controlled, forceful precision. Only then does he acknowledge the aide with a slight nod, dismissing him with a flick of the fingers. The young man bows his eyes, blinking slowly in the lantern light, and retreats back into the cold, leaving you alone once more with the emperor and his relentless work. Napoleon gestures towards the portfolio with his quill. "You see," he says, his voice now devoid of its earlier emotional weight, replaced by a tone of dry, practical resignation. "The empire does not sleep. It is a beast with 1,000 mouths, and all of them are hungry. They hunger for decisions, for orders, for confirmation, for reassurance. And they all send their pleas here to this tent." He unties the leather straps of the portfolio, and a cascade of documents spills onto the table, a small avalanche of paper that threatens to overwhelm the map beneath. You see dispatches sealed with the grand crests of his marshals, scribbled requests from quartermasters, and elegant flowing letters from ministers in Paris. Each one is a thread connected to the man before you. This, he says, picking up the first dispatch, is the true ritual of the night. Not prayer, not rest. This. He takes a small, slender knife from the table and with a single precise movement slices through the red wax seal. The sound is a crisp, clean break in the silence. He unfolds the paper, its rustle sharp in the cold air. His eyes scan the page. They do not seem to read in a linear fashion from left to right. Instead, they sweep across the document, absorbing it in its entirety, a general surveying a field of words. You watch his expression, but it is a mask of impenetrable concentration. There is no flicker of surprise, no hint of anger or joy. There is only the silent, efficient processing of information. He is no longer a man. He is a machine for making decisions. He places the dispatch to one side and picks up another, repeating the ritual. The breaking of the seal, the unfolding of the paper, the sweep of his eyes. After a dozen such documents have been opened and sorted into neat piles, he looks at you. "From Marshal Masséna," he says, tapping one of the piles. "He requires more cannonballs. He always requires more cannonballs. If I gave him all the iron in France, he would fire it at the Austrians in a week and ask for more." From Ney, he indicates another pile, a report on enemy movements. Detailed, aggressive, impulsive, exactly like the man himself. You can read a general's character in his reports, you know. The cautious ones use too many words, the reckless ones not enough. He picks up a third letter, this one on finer paper, sealed with a more ornate crest. He sniffs it with a look of faint disdain. And this is from Talleyrand. It will be full of elegant phrases, veiled warnings, and subtle requests for his own advancement, all wrapped in the perfume of loyalty. Reading a letter from my foreign minister is like trying to eat an artichoke in the dark. You have to go through a great many sharp leaves to find a very small heart. He sets it aside unopened. That one can wait until the coffee is fresh. It requires a clearer head. He then straightens up and claps his hands softly once. The tent flap opens again, and this time it is a different man, a secretary older and thinner, a portable writing desk strapped over his shoulder. He looks even more tired than the first aide, his eyes shadowed with the permanent exhaustion of one who lives by another man's schedule. "Fleury," Napoleon says, his voice now sharp and clear, the voice of command. "Take this down." And so begins the next phase of the nightly ritual. Napoleon starts to pace again, his boots resuming their soft, rhythmic thud on the dirt floor. But now his thoughts are not for himself or for you. They are for the empire. He begins to dictate, and the words flow from him in a relentless, unbroken stream. To Marshal Masséna, he begins, not pausing for the secretary to ready his quill. Acknowledged. The cannonballs will be sent. Remind him that ammunition is a tool, not a spectacle. Victory is achieved through precision, not volume. The secretary's quill scratches frantically across the page, a desperate attempt to capture the torrent of words. You watch the man's hand, the way his knuckles are white with effort. You see the occasional smudge of ink as a drop falls from the harried quill. Napoleon dictates letters, orders, memoranda. He moves from military strategy to logistical details to political appointments without pausing for breath. His mind is a marvel of organization, a library where every book is open to the correct page simultaneously. He pauses his pacing for a moment and glances at you, a flicker of that dry humor returning to his eyes. He lowers his voice to a conspiratorial whisper so the secretary cannot hear. Finding a good general is a difficult task. But finding a secretary who does not fall asleep and write more blankets instead of more battalions after midnight, that, my friend, is a true miracle. I suspect young Fleury here dreams of his pillow more ardently than he dreams of the glory of France. You offer a small sympathetic smile both for the exhausted secretary and for the general who must rely on such fragile human instruments to execute his grand designs. The power dynamic in the small tent is immense. Napoleon a whirlwind of tireless energy, and his aide a portrait of human frailty bound together in the service of an idea. The dictation continues for what feels like an hour, perhaps more. Finally, with a list of troop movements for the coming day, he stops. That is all, Fleury. Have them copied and dispatched before dawn. The secretary, looking visibly relieved, gathers his papers, bows low, and backs out of the tent, a man escaping a storm. Silence descends once more, broken only by the ever-present wind. Napoleon stands by the table looking down at the letters and orders that will soon be racing across Italy on horseback. He picks up his own quill, the one he was using before, and dips it in the ink. He looks at it, turning it over in his fingers. "The sword," he says softly. His voice, once more reflective and intimate, is a clumsy instrument. It is loud. It is messy. It makes a grand show, but it is ultimately a simple tool for a simple purpose: to break things. He holds the quill up in the lantern light, its dark feathered tip seeming to absorb the flame. But this is where the real power resides. This small feathered tool, it can move armies without making a sound. It can raise taxes, create laws, depose kings, and forge treaties that will outlive every man in this camp. The sword takes a life. The quill can shape a million of them. You look from the man to the quill to the map, and you finally understand the true nature of the engine that drives this empire. It is not the cannons whose roar you can imagine in the distance. It is not the cavalry whose thundering charge can shake the earth. It is here. It is this single tireless mind in this small cold tent in the dead of night with a bottle of ink and a mountain of paper. It is the relentless, silent, administrative heart of a continent in turmoil. He sits down again, pulls a fresh sheet of paper towards him, and begins to write. The scratching sound resumes, filling the tent. It is the sound of an empire being held together one word at a time. The rhythmic scratching of the quill fills the tent, a sound that has become the steady heartbeat of the night. Napoleon is hunched over his work, a universe of paper and ink spread before him. The focused, almost monastic calm of his routine seems absolute. This rhythm of relentless work you think could continue until dawn. The empire is being run from this table, one decisive order at a time, but then the rhythm is broken. A hesitation at the tent flap, more tentative than the previous entrances, is followed by a soft cough. It is not the deferential entry of an aide with his scheduled portfolio, but the unwelcome sound of an unplanned intrusion. Napoleon's quill stops mid-word. He does not look up, but his entire posture stiffens. A flicker of immense, tightly controlled annoyance crosses his features, before being smoothed away into a mask of neutral inquiry. You feel the temperature in the tent drop by another degree. "Enter," he says, and the word is not an invitation, but a cold command. An officer, a general by his uniform, steps inside. He is a man you recognize from earlier briefings, a commander of cavalry known for his fire and bravado on the battlefield. But here, in the presence of his emperor, he seems diminished, his face flushed with a mixture of urgency and apology. "Sire," the general begins, his voice strained. "My apologies for the late hour. It is a matter of some delicacy." Napoleon slowly, deliberately places his quill down. He leans back on his stool, folding his arms across his chest. His eyes, now fixed on the general, are like chips of ice. He does not speak. He simply waits, letting the silence and the general's own discomfort do the work for him. It concerns the new shipment of horses from Normandy, sire. The man stammers, clearly unnerved by the emperor's silent scrutiny. They are fine animals, superb. The issue is their allocation. Marshal Murat insists they are for his cuirassiers. But General Lassalle believes they were promised to his light cavalry. The men are becoming restless. It is a matter of pride. You watch this scene unfold with a sense of surreal disbelief. Here in the nerve center of a continental war with the fates of nations hanging in the balance, the commander-in-chief is being asked to mediate a dispute over horses. It is a problem fit for a stable master, not an emperor. Napoleon remains silent for another long moment. He stares at the general, his expression unreadable. You can almost see the calculations turning in his mind, not about the horses, but about the character of the men. He leads their vanities, their fragile egos, the 1,000 petty human dramas that complicate the clean geometry of war. Finally, he speaks, his voice dangerously soft. Pride. He repeats, tasting the word as if it were a foreign substance. So while I am in here attempting to orchestrate the defeat of the Austrian Empire, 2 of my most senior cavalry commanders are outside arguing over the color of their new mounts, like schoolboys fighting over a shiny conqueror. Is that the situation? The general flinches. Sire, it is a matter of morale. Morale. Napoleon cuts in, his voice still quiet, but now laced with a terrifying sharpness. Morale is my soldiers having confidence that their generals are focused on the enemy and not on preening their own feathers. Morale is knowing that their lives will not be wasted due to the vanity of the men leading them. He stands up, and the small tent suddenly feels even smaller. He walks slowly towards the general, who seems to shrink with every step his emperor takes. Here is my order. You will convey it immediately. Marshal Murat, a man who appreciates spectacle, will take the black horses. General Lassalle, who values speed, will take the bays. And you will tell them both from me that I expect a detailed report on my desk by dawn. Not about the horses, but about how they intend to use them to break the Austrian line at the next engagement. I am less interested in their pride than I am in their results. He stops directly in front of the chastened officer. Is that understood? Yes, sire. Perfectly. The general mutters, his eyes fixed on the ground. Good. Now leave me. The Austrians, I find, are a far more interesting problem than the vanities of my own marshals. The general bows hastily and all but flees from the tent, disappearing back into the night. Napoleon watches him go, then turns back to you, the mask of command dissolving to reveal a look of profound, almost cosmic weariness. He shakes his head slowly and lets out a long, frustrated sigh. Do you see, he says, walking back to his chair and slumping into it. It is the great enduring comedy of power. I can make the King of Prussia tremble with a single sharply worded letter. I can force the Tsar of Russia to the negotiating table. I can redraw the map of the German states as if it were a sketch in my notebook. But I cannot stop 2 of my best commanders from behaving like children in a stable yard. He picks up his cold cup of coffee, looks at it, and sets it down again with a soft clink. They speak of absolute power. There is no such thing. It is an illusion. You believe you are commanding the great tides of history, but you are constantly being dragged under by the small, foolish human currents. Pride, jealousy, greed, stubbornness. These are forces more unpredictable and often more dangerous than any enemy army. He gestures around the tent at the maps, at the piles of paper. I sit here night after night trying to build an empire on logic, on strategy, on merit. And then I am interrupted by a dispute over horses. I try to create a new code of laws for all of France, one based on reason and clarity. And I am forced to spend an hour settling a matter of honor between 2 officers who feel their dignity has been slighted. He leans forward, his elbows on the table, and rubs his temples with his fingertips. In that moment, he looks not like an emperor, but like any man anywhere, overwhelmed by the sheer, unending frustration of managing other people. In these moments, he confesses, his voice so quiet you have to lean in to hear it. I do not wish for another victory. I do not wish for more territory, or for the enemy to surrender. I wish for the simplest things, things a common soldier takes for granted. His gaze becomes distant as if he is looking through the canvas walls and far beyond. I wish for a glass of water that does not taste of the wooden barrel it has been sitting in for a week. I wish for a piece of bread that is actually fresh, not this hard biscuit that could serve as a paperweight. I wish, he says, and his voice is filled with a deep aching longing for 1 hour. Just 1 hour of absolute uninterrupted silence. An hour where no one needs a decision, no one has a complaint, no one requires an order. An hour to simply stand outside and look at the stars, not to calculate their navigational use, or to wonder if they are an omen, but to simply look at them, to remember that the universe is larger than this map, larger than this war, larger than myself. The confession hangs in the tent, a fragile and deeply human admission. You see the immense chasm between the public man, the legend forged in fire and glory, and the private man who craves nothing more than a moment of peace and a fresh piece of bread. The paradox of his life is laid bare before you. The man who holds the fate of millions in his hands has no control over his own simple comforts. He seems to shake himself from his reverie, a small, almost imperceptible shudder, as if casting off a moment of weakness. The emperor returns, pushing the weary man back down into the depths. But he says, his voice regaining its familiar resolute tone, the stars will wait. The Austrians will not. He reaches for the portfolio again, pulling out a new dispatch. He breaks the seal. His eyes begin their swift, sweeping scan of the page. The machine is working again. The great engine of the empire, briefly stalled by a moment of human friction, has restarted. And you realize with a new and profound understanding that this is the truest expression of his power. Not the grand victories, but this. The ability to endure the 1,000 petty annoyances, the endless human follies, and still in the dead of night, in a cold tent, return to the work again and again and again. The sound of the wind outside the tent seems to soften. The sharp, decisive sounds of official work have ceased, leaving a quiet, more contemplative silence in their wake. The general who had come with his trivial dispute is long gone, vanished back into the vast breathing darkness of the camp. Napoleon remains at his table, but the rigid posture of the commander has softened. He pushes the neat stacks of official papers, the dispatches, the orders, the logistical nightmares to one side with a sweep of his arm. The gesture is not one of anger, but of mental house cleaning, as if he is clearing a space not just on the table, but in his mind. The cold, hard calculus of empire is for a few precious moments concluded. You watch as he reaches down beside his campaign stool and retrieves a small, unadorned box made of dark, polished wood. It is not a grand chest, but a simple, practical coffer, its corners worn smooth and its leather straps softened with age and constant travel. This, you sense, is not an object of the state. It is an object of the man. He places it on the table in the cleared space, and his hands, which had been so sharp and decisive in breaking the official wax seals, now move with a slow, almost reverent gentleness. He does not use a knife. Instead, he carefully unbuckles the small straps and lifts the lid. The scent that rises from the box is faint, but entirely different from the tense atmosphere of damp wool and wood smoke. It is the scent of dry paper, of a distant perfume, of a life being lived elsewhere. There are two kinds of correspondence in a campaign, he says softly, his voice taking on a warmer, more personal tone. He is speaking to you again, sharing another, more private corner of his world. The first kind is for the general. He gestures to the pile of official documents he just pushed aside. It is a thing of facts and needs, a piece of the great machine. It speaks of battalions and borders, of ammunition and bread. It is cold, necessary, and has no heart. He turns his attention back to the wooden box. But this is the second kind. This correspondence is for the man, and it is far more dangerous. His fingers carefully lift out a small packet of letters tied together with a simple blue silk ribbon. He handles them with a tenderness that you had not thought him capable of. He doesn't untie the ribbon at first, simply holding the packet in the palm of his hand, weighing it as if it contained something far heavier than paper. A report from a general can be misread, and you may lose a battle. He muses, his gaze fixed on the letters. But a letter from home, if read at the wrong moment, can make you question the entire war. It is a ghost. A softer, more insidious kind of ghost than the ones we spoke of earlier. It is the ghost of a life you are not living. He carefully unties the ribbon, his movements slow and deliberate. He selects one letter from the packet. You notice the paper is finer, more delicate than the coarse sheets of military dispatches. He unfolds it, and the faint scent of jasmine, the perfume favored by his wife Josephine, drifts into the cold air of the tent. It is a startlingly intimate scent in this harsh masculine environment. He does not read the letter aloud. He simply scans the elegant looping handwriting, and you watch as a complex series of emotions plays across his face in the flickering lantern light. There is a flicker of affection, a shadow of frustration, a deep resonant wave of longing, and then a profound sadness. He is 1,000 miles away in a rose garden at Malmaison, in a gilded room in Paris, anywhere but here. After a long moment, he looks up, his eyes seeming to refocus on the tent around him, as if returning from a great distance. He refolds the letter with care. She writes of roses, he says, his voice quiet. She tells me the roses in the garden have bloomed and that the children of our friends are growing so tall. She writes of society, of a new play, of the trivial scandals that occupy Paris. He gives a small, joyless smile. While I am here surrounded by mud and gunpowder, she writes of roses. It is another world. Sometimes I do not know if her letters are a comfort or a torment. They remind me of what I am fighting for, and they also remind me of absolutely everything I am missing. They are a lifeline, and they are a chain. He places the letter back with the others and pulls out another object from the box. It is wrapped in a small square of dark velvet. With the same careful deliberation, he unwraps it. Inside is a miniature portrait no larger than the palm of his hand, set in a simple, unadorned ivory frame. He holds it so that the lantern light falls upon it. It is the face of a young boy with fair hair and serious, intelligent eyes. His son, the boy they call the King of Rome. He gazes at the portrait for a very long time, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. The formidable general, the emperor who makes Europe tremble, vanishes completely. In his place is only a father staring at the image of his child. A grand title, is it not? The King of Rome. He whispers the sound so soft it is almost carried away by the wind. A title for a dynasty. A future for an empire. All resting on the shoulders of a boy so small he can barely see over a dinner table. You watch him and you see the immense pride in his expression mingled with an almost unbearable sorrow. I have given him a kingdom. I have given him a name that will echo in history. But I have not given him a father. Not in any way that truly matters. I have been with him in total for only a few months of his entire life. His thumb gently strokes the cool ivory frame of the portrait. I know him only through reports and these painted images. They tell me he is clever, that he is strong-willed. They say he has my eyes. But I do not know the sound of his laughter. I have not been there to teach him how to ride a pony or to see him take his first steps. I am shaping a world for him, but I am entirely absent from his own small world. The letters I receive speak of his progress, but they are like dispatches from a foreign land, a land of childhood to which I have no visa. He looks at you, his eyes clouded with a deep personal pain that is far removed from the strategic burdens he discussed earlier. This is the true paradox of my life. I sacrifice my presence in my son's life so that I may build an empire for him to inherit. But what is an empire to a boy who simply wants his father? What good are all the thrones in Europe if he must grow up among strangers? He falls silent again, lost in the painted eyes of his son. The weight of his choice, the monumental sacrifice of the personal for the political, fills the small tent. It is a heavier burden, you realize, than any military defeat. A battle can be won another day. A lost year with a child can never be regained. Finally, with a sigh that seems to drain the very air from his lungs, he carefully wraps the miniature in its velvet cloth and places it back in the box. He reties the ribbon around the packet of letters and lays it gently on top. He closes the lid, the soft click of the latch sounding like a door closing on another life. The moment of vulnerability is over. He pushes the wooden box to the side, his movements once again becoming crisp and efficient. The man, the husband, the father recedes, and the emperor returns. These are my anchors. He says, his voice steady once more. though a trace of the earlier sadness lingers in his eyes. He taps the box. They are what keep the general from completely consuming the man, but they are heavy anchors. They are a constant reminder of the price of all this ambition. He turns back to the table, his gaze falling once more upon the map. But you see it differently now. It is no longer just a tool of conquest. It is the architect of his loneliness, the reason for the sad personal treasures hidden away in the small wooden box. The work he is about to resume is not just for France or for glory or for power. It is for a small boy, with serious eyes, a boy he hopes will one day understand the monumental and terrible love of an absent father. The small wooden box is closed, its clasp clicking shut with a soft finality. The tender, vulnerable moment has passed. Napoleon pushes the box gently to the side, his movements once again precise and contained. He has sealed away the man, the father, the husband, the son, and in his place the historical force re-emerges. He turns his gaze back to the map, but you see a change in his eyes. He is no longer looking at the next river to be crossed or the next hill to be taken. He is looking at the entire continent, at the vast sweep of his own life's work, as if seeing it for the first time from a great and lonely height. He is silent for a time, his mind clearly traveling far beyond the canvas walls of the tent. The wind outside seems to have died down, leaving a stillness that is even more profound. You are left with the quiet crackle of the lantern's flame and the immense unspoken weight of the history spread out on the table. When he finally speaks, his voice is different again. It is no longer the intimate whisper of a confidant, but the resonant, thoughtful tone of a man grappling with his own legend. They call it ambition, he says, his finger tracing the border of a kingdom he himself has redrawn. It is a simple word, a convenient label for a complex and incurable affliction. It is not a desire you see. It is a hunger, a fever in the blood, a constant gnawing restlessness that forbids peace. The moment a thing is achieved, a victory won, a treaty signed, a law passed, it becomes history. It becomes stale. It dies. The only thing that feels truly alive is the future, the next horizon, the thing not yet conquered. For a man like me, he looks at you. His gaze, direct and unflinching stillness, is not peace. It is a form of death. It is the beginning of the end. You understand then that his ceaseless campaigns, his endless work, his refusal to rest, it is not merely a quest for power. It is a fundamental aspect of his nature. He is a force of movement, and to stop would be to cease to exist. His restlessness is not a symptom of his empire. It is the engine of it. He picks up a different stack of papers from the table. Not the military dispatches, but something else bound in clean vellum. The pages are covered in dense, meticulously corrected text. Do you know what this is? He asks, holding the documents as if they weighed more than any cannonball. This is not a battle plan. It is a law. My code. A system of laws for France, for all the world, that will outlive me, that will outlive my marshals, that may even outlive the memory of our battles. He lets the statement hang in the air, its significance vast and undeniable. And where do you think this was written? In a grand sunlit hall in Paris, with learned jurists debating fine points of philosophy in their comfortable chairs. He shakes his head, a wry smile touching his lips. It was written here, intense exactly like this one, in the dead of night between one battle and the next. It was conceived while my aides were sleeping and my enemies were dreaming of my downfall. While decent men of leisure were resting, I was here tearing down 1,000 years of feudal chaos, of aristocratic privilege, of legal contradiction, and building something new, something based on reason, on clarity, on the idea that a man should be judged by his merit, not his birth. He places the papers back on the table with a reverence he did not show the military reports. This will last longer than any victory. This will shape the lives of generations. And it was born from sleeplessness. Modern Europe, my friend, was forged in the hours when good men were asleep. It was built by an insomniac who could not bear the chaos of the old world, and so was forced to create a new one in his own image. His energy seems to swell as he speaks of his creation, the fever of his ambition burning brightly in the small cold tent. He is the architect, the lawgiver, the man who saw a world mired in the past and dragged it kicking and screaming into a new century. But then, just as quickly, the fire seems to bank. His shoulders slump slightly, and he looks back at the map at the red and blue pins marking the positions of armies, his own and the enemy's. The somber philosophical weight returns to his voice. "But to build a new world," he says, and his voice drops to a near whisper, "you must first clear the ground." And the old world does not yield peacefully. It clings to its privileges, to its traditions, to its comfortable decay. Clearing the ground is a violent, messy business. He looks at you, and you see a deep, ancient sorrow in his eyes, the sorrow of a creator who must also be a destroyer. You cannot build a new road without felling ancient trees. You cannot plant a new garden without turning the soil, and in that soil are the deep, tangled roots of everything that came before. The wars, the endless wars, the deaths, the suffering. That is the terrible sound of the old world being broken apart to make way for the new. He turns away, walking to the tent flap and looking out into the night. The poets will write of glory, and the historians will write of tactics. But the truth is simpler and harsher. The legacy I am building is fertilized with blood. The ash from the fires of our battles is a harsh fertilizer. But I have seen it with my own eyes. Things do grow from it. New ideas take root. New nations find their voice. A new kind of man emerges, one who believes he is the master of his own destiny. He lets the tent flap fall, shutting out the night. He stands in the center of the tent, a solitary figure surrounded by the paper ghosts of his own making. I tell myself that the harvest will be worth the cost of the plowing, he says, his voice now so low it is almost inaudible. I must tell myself that. It is the only way to endure the silence in this tent when the work is done. It is the only way to bear the weight of the names in the ledger. You sit in the silence, the immensity of his confession settling upon you. You have been granted a glimpse into the terrible justification of a man who moves history. He is not a simple tyrant, not a mere conqueror. He is a man who has made a pact with the future, accepting the monstrous role of both creator and destroyer to achieve it. He has weighed the world in his hands and found it wanting, and has had the terrifying audacity to build another. He seems to have exhausted himself with this final grand revelation. The fever of his ambition, having burned so brightly now, leaves him looking simply tired. He walks back to the table, but he does not pick up the quill. His work for the night appears to be done. He looks towards the entrance of the tent, as if he can sense the coming of the dawn through the thick canvas. The night is almost over, he says quietly. The restless part is done. The legacy is written for better or for worse. He looks at you one last time, a look of strange finality in his eyes. Now all that remains is the final reckoning, the final sigh. The words hang in the air, a perfect and somber bridge to what is to come. The story of his restless legacy has been told. Now all that is left is the story of his rest. The fever of his great confession has broken. The man who just moments ago was a titan, a force of nature justifying the remaking of a continent, now seems to shrink back into his own mortal frame. The energy that had burned so brightly in his eyes has receded, leaving behind a profound and soul-deep weariness. He moves from the table and slowly lowers himself onto the rickety campaign stool, his movements no longer sharp and decisive, but heavy with the weight of his own history. He runs a hand over his face, and in that simple gesture, you see not an emperor, but a man who has been awake for a lifetime. He looks towards the tent flap, where the impenetrable black of the night is just beginning to soften into the faintest ghostly shade of gray. The dawn is coming. His night of work of reflection is almost at an end. It is a strange paradox, is it not, he says, and his voice is much softer now, a near whisper that you have to strain to hear. It is the voice of a man at the very end of his strength. A man spends his entire life in motion. He chases glory from one end of Europe to the other. He defies rest, he scorns stillness, he sees sleep as a surrender. Only to find at the end of it all that his one true ultimate ambition is for a quiet bed. Not a throne, not another crown, not one more victory, just a bed. One that is still and silent and asks nothing of him. He stares into the dying embers of the fire pit just outside his tent, as if seeing a future vision in the glowing coals. They will build me a grand tomb, I suppose. They will feel they must. It will be carved from marble and granite somewhere in Paris, probably Les Invalides. They will inscribe the names of my victories upon its walls, Austerlitz, Jena Marengo. They will surround me with captured banners and heroic statues. He shakes his head, a slow, melancholic movement. But they will miss the point entirely. The only true luxury of that place, the only feature of it that will have any meaning for its occupant, will not be the marble or the gold. It will be the silence. The absolute, final, and unbreakable silence. To be still. To finally be still. That will be the last and perhaps the only true victory. A faint, tired smile touches his lips, and a glimmer of his old wry humor returns, though it is now tinged with a deep and abiding sadness. There at least, he says, his eyes meeting yours with a look of shared ironic understanding, I will finally have some privacy. My marshals will not be able to burst in with their squabbles over horses. Talleyrand will not be able to send his perfumed, poisonous letters. The only visitor will be history, and she, I have found, is a very quiet and patient guest. She can wait. The thought seems to give him a small measure of peace. He has wrestled with his legacy all night, with the ghosts of his past and the shape of his future. Now, having seen it all, he seems ready to let it go. He turns his full attention to you for the last time. The emperor, the general, the lawgiver. They have all receded, and what is left is a host, a guide at the end of a long journey whose final concern is for his guest. Look at you, he says, his voice gentle, almost paternal. You are warm. You are safe in your bed. Your only battle tonight is against the coming of the morning. You have the one thing that I, with all my armies and all my power, could never truly command for myself, a moment of simple, uncomplicated peace. He leans forward slightly, his gaze holding yours with a soft, compelling intensity. And so now you must do something for me. A final request from your host. You must rest. Do not fight it as I have always done. Surrender to it. It is a victory more profound, more lasting than any I have ever known. Do not think of tomorrow's battles. Do not think of the maps and the ledgers. Leave that work to me. Your only duty now is to the quiet of your own mind. His voice becomes a final soothing whisper, a gentle command that is also a blessing. Sleep, my friend. Sleep for yourself, and perhaps, in the great still quiet of your dreams, you might sleep for me as well. He gives a final slow nod, a gesture of dismissal that is also one of farewell. He turns away from you, his gaze settling once more on the pale light growing at the edge of the world. The audience is over. His story is told. The great restless engine has finally come to a halt. You watch as he remains seated perfectly still, a silhouette against the coming dawn. The emperor in his tent, awaiting the day he has already shaped, is now just a man waiting. And now you are no longer in the cold of an Italian field. You are back in the soft, welcome warmth of your own bed. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth fades, replaced by the familiar comfort of your own room. The ghost of Napoleon and his restless night recede, leaving behind only a profound sense of stillness. Feel the weight of your own blankets, a gentle, reassuring pressure that asks nothing of you. Feel the softness of your pillow, a luxury an emperor in his glory could only dream of. The battles of your own day are over. The ledgers are closed. The dispatches can wait. The great tides of history, the rise and fall of empires, the struggles of titans, they are now just distant echoes, a story told to guide you to this very moment of peace. Your only duty now is to let go, to allow the quiet to envelop you, to surrender to the gentle pulling current of sleep. The night's journey is complete. The last page has been turned. The final candle has been extinguished. Rest now. The silence you have found is the prize he sought his entire life, and it is all yours. Sleep well.